A widow walks alone beneath the pines when she finds a man Apache left for dead. Abandoned in the forest, she could have turned away. Instead, she kneels, shares water, and a name. From that choice, to lives bend, tonight, hear how a single act of courage and kindness changed his life and hers. Hey there, thanks for being here. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what you think of the story. Let's keep going. The axe cut through the morning air with a sharp sound that echoed through the forest. Sarah Matthews wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. Watching the pile of firewood that slowly grew at her feet, winter was approaching, and each piece of wood meant one more night of warmth. For her daughters, Mama will be back soon, she murmured to herself, as she had done every morning for 2 years. Since William was no longer there to hear her worries, the wind whispered through the trees. Carrying the scent of wet leaves and earth, Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, allowing herself a brief peace before returning to the reality of unpaid bills and mouths to feed. At 32, her hands already showed the marks of hard labor, but her eyes still shone with the determination that kept her standing. A branch snapped in the distance. Sarah raised her head, her heart racing. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too heavy. To deliberate, she gripped the axe tighter. Muscles tense. In the forest, caution was a matter of survival. Another sound, closer. She followed the direction of the noise, her feet stepping softly on the fallen leaves. Between two enormous trees, a dark shape caught her attention. Sarah approached slowly, her heart beating so loud it seemed to echo through the silent forest. When she finally saw what it was, the axe slipped from her hands. A man lay crumpled against the base of an ancient oak, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. Blood had dried in dark patches across his torn shirt, and his breathing came in shallow, labored gasps. Sarah's first instinct was to run every fiber of her being, scream danger. But as she took a step backward, something made her pause. His face, even through the dirt and blood, she could see he was young, perhaps not much older than herself. His skin bore the weathered bronze of someone who lived under open skies, and his long black hair was braided with small feathers and beads that caught the filtered morning light. A Native American, she realized, her heart hammering against her ribs. The stories came flooding back, whispered warnings from the townspeople about raids and violence. Tales of settlers found scalped in their beds. But looking at him now, barely clinging to life, all she could see was suffering. Please, he whispered, the word barely audible. The sound broke through her paralysis. Sarah knelt beside him, her hands hovering uncertainly over his wounds. A deep gash ran across his shoulder, and his left leg was bent at an odd angle. Someone had beaten him severely. This wasn't the aftermath of some distant battle, but something far more personal and brutal. Who did this to you? She asked softly. His dark eyes focused on her face with effort. My own people, he managed. Each word a struggle. Left me to die. The admission hit her like a physical blow. Cast out by his own tribe, abandoned to die alone in the wilderness. Sarah understood abandonment, understood the crushing weight of being left to face an impossible world alone. When William had died, she felt that same desperate isolation, that bone-deep fear that she wouldn't survive what lay ahead. I should go, she whispered, but her feet remained planted. Please, he said again, his voice breaking. Don't let me die like this. Sarah closed her eyes, William's voice echoing in her memory. You've got the biggest heart in the county, Sarah Matthews. Sometimes I worry it'll be the death of you. Maybe it would be. Taking in a wounded native could bring down the wrath of every settler for miles around. Captain Mitchell and his soldiers were already suspicious of anyone who showed the slightest sympathy toward the local tribes. But as she looked at this broken man, she saw William in those final days helpless, afraid, clinging to life with desperate fingers. She couldn't leave him. Can you walk? She asked, already knowing the answer. He tried to push himself upright, and collapsed with a groan that tore through her chest. Sarah looked around the forest, calculating distances and risks. The house was nearly a mile away, and Emily would be getting Clara and little Lily ready for breakfast soon. How could she explain bringing home a native warrior? But first, she had to get him there alive. Sarah removed her shawl and pressed it against his shoulder wound, watching him bite back a cry of pain. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep him conscious. "Joshua," he breathed. "I'm Sarah. I'm going to help you, Joshua, but I need you to trust me." His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the forest around them seemed to hold its breath. Two souls, both marked by loss and betrayal, recognizing something fundamental in each other. Sarah had made her choice, and there would be no turning back. "I trust you," Joshua whispered, and those 3 words sealed both their fates. The journey back to the house felt endless. Sarah had fashioned a makeshift stretcher from fallen branches in her torn petticoat, but Joshua's weight made every step a struggle. His consciousness drifted in and out like morning fog, and twice she had to stop when he cried out in pain, fearing the sound would carry to neighboring farms. "Almost there," she whispered, more to herself than to him. The small farmhouse appeared through the trees, smoke curling from the chimney where Emily had likely started the morning fire. Sarah's heart clenched at the sight of her eldest daughter's responsibility at 14. Emily had already taken on burdens no child should carry. Sarah dragged the stretcher around to the back of the house, toward the small storage room William had built as an addition years ago. It had been meant for tools and preserves, but now it would serve a far different purpose. The room had a separate entrance and a single window that faced the forest. It would have to do. "Joshua," she whispered urgently. "Joshua, I need you to stay awake." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused but aware. "We're at my home, but you must be quiet. My daughters, they can't know you're here." "Not yet." She pushed open the wooden door, grateful it didn't creak. Inside, the room smelled of dried herbs and old wood. Sarah cleared a space among the stored supplies, spreading her remaining shawl on the floor to create a makeshift bed. Getting Joshua inside required every ounce of strength she possessed. By the time she had him settled, both were breathing heavily, and fresh blood had seeped through the makeshift bandages. "Mama," Emily's voice called from the main house. "Mama, where are you?" "Lily's asking for breakfast." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Coming, dear," she called back, her voice strained. She turned to Joshua, whose dark eyes were alert despite his pain. "I'll be back with supplies. Don't make a sound." He nodded weakly, understanding the gravity of their situation. Sarah slipped out of the storage room and hurried toward the kitchen, her mind racing. She needed clean cloth, water, and something for his pain, but how to gather these things without raising suspicion? "Mama, you look pale," Emily observed as Sarah entered the kitchen. Her eldest daughter stood at the stove, efficiently managing breakfast while Clara, 12, helped little Lily with her buttons. "Just tired, sweetheart." Sarah forced a smile, watching her daughters with fresh eyes. How could she explain bringing danger into their home? Yet how could she let a man die when she had the power to save him? The firewood still outside, Emily noted. Did something happen in the forest? Sarah's hands trembled as she poured water from the pitcher. I saw a wounded deer. It ran off, but it made me think about how cruel the world can be." Emily's expression softened. At 14, she had already learned too much about life's cruelties. The deer will find its way. "Mama, they're stronger than they look." "Yes," Sarah murmured, gathering clean rags under the pretense of dusting. Sometimes the wounded surprise us with their resilience. Throughout breakfast, Sarah's mind remained split between her daughter's chatter and the man hidden mere yards away. Every creak of the house made her tense. Every pause in conversation felt loaded with suspicion. "I'll gather more firewood after breakfast," she announced, needing an excuse to return to Joshua. "I can help," Emily offered. "No," Sarah said quickly, then softened her tone. "I mean, you've done enough this morning." help Clara with her sewing instead. As her daughters returned to their morning routines, Sarah stepped outside with a basket of supplies hidden beneath clean laundry. The secret she now carried felt heavier than any burden she'd borne since William's death. In the storage room, Joshua waited in silence, his trust complete and terrifying. Sarah knelt beside Joshua, in the dim light filtering through the small window. Up close, his injuries looked even worse than she'd first realized. The gash across his shoulder was deep and jagged, as if torn by claws rather than cut by a blade. His left leg was swollen and discolored, though she couldn't tell if it was broken or merely badly bruised. "This is going to hurt," she warned, dipping a clean cloth in the basin of water she brought. Joshua's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "I've survived worse." As Sarah began cleaning the wound on his shoulder, she tried not to think about the stories she'd heard in town tales of native warriors who could endure torture without making a sound. But when she pressed the cloth against the deepest part of the gash, Joshua's sharp intake of breath reminded her that he was just a man, flesh and blood like any other. "Tell me what happened," she said quietly, hoping to distract him from the pain. For a long moment, only the sound of dripping water filled the small room. Sarah had nearly given up on receiving an answer when Joshua finally spoke. "I fell in love," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's hand stilled. Of all the explanations she'd expected Dre's gone wrong, territorial disputes, crimes against his tribe, this was not one of them. Her name was Morning Star. She was beautiful, kind, but she was promised to our war chief's son, Joshua. Once as Sarah resumed cleaning his wound, "I should have stayed away. But you didn't. No. We met in secret for months. We planned to run away together, start a new life far from both our peoples." His voice grew bitter. "Someone saw us, told the chief." Sarah could imagine the rest. The fury of a leader betrayed, the shame brought upon the tribe, and Morning Star, married to the chief's son 3 days ago. "They made me watch." Joshua's eyes closed, and Sarah saw a different kind of pain cross his features, deeper than any physical wound. "Then they beat me and left me to die. Said I was no longer worthy to call myself one of their people." Sarah's heart ached for him. She understood rejection, understood the crushing weight of losing everything you thought you were. When William died, she felt cast out by the community of couples they'd once belonged to, left to navigate a world that suddenly had no place for her. "I'm sorry," she said. "A minute. Why?" Joshua's eyes opened, studying her face. "Why are you helping me? Your people and mine. We are not friends." Sarah paused in her work, considering his question. "When my husband died, I thought I would die too. Not from grief, though there was plenty of that, but from the impossibility of everything that lay ahead. People said kind things, brought food for a week or two, then went back to their lives. But the nights went on forever." She wrung out the bloodied cloth and continued. "I used to lie awake wondering if anyone would notice, if I simply stopped, if I just gave up and let the world swallow us whole. But you didn't know, because of them." She gestured toward the main house where her daughters were likely finishing their morning lessons. "They needed me to be stronger than I felt." Joshua watched her hands work with steady precision despite their conversation. "You are stronger than you know. So are you," Sarah replied. "Surviving betrayal like that, it takes more courage than most people possess." As she finished cleaning his wounds and began wrapping them with strips of clean linen, Sarah felt something shifting between them, a recognition that went deeper than shared pain. They were both survivors, both cast adrift by forces beyond their control. "Rest now," she said, checking the bandages one final time. "I'll bring food when I can, Sarah." Her name sounded different in his voice, gentler somehow. "Thank you." As she gathered her supplies to leave, Sarah realized that for the first time since William's death, she didn't feel entirely alone in the world. 3 days passed in a careful dance of deception. Sarah had fallen into a routine of stealing away to the storage room whenever her daughters were occupied during afternoon naps, early morning chores, or the precious hour after supper when Emily helped Clara and Lily with their letters by LAMPLIGHT. Joshua was healing faster than she'd expected. The fever that had racked his body the first night had broken, and though his legs still pained him, he could sit up without assistance. More concerning to Sarah was his growing restlessness. A warrior accustomed to open skies and endless horizons was not meant to be caged in a room barely larger than a closet. How much longer? He asked as she changed his bandages on the fourth morning. Sarah paused in her work, the question she'd been dreading. Your shoulder needs at least another week to heal properly, and your leg is fine. Joshua shifted, attempting to prove his point, then winced at the movement. Stubbornness won't mend broken bones, Sarah said firmly, but her tone was gentle. She understood his frustration. After William's death, she'd felt similarly trapped by circumstances, by expectations, by the weight of responsibilities that seemed impossible to bear. A soft knock at the main house's door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah's blood ran cold. Visitors were rare, especially this early in the morning. Stay absolutely silent, she whispered to Joshua, then quickly hid the medical supplies beneath a pile of old sacks. Sarah emerged from the storage room, smoothing her skirts and trying to calm her racing heart. Through the kitchen window, she could see a figure on horseback, military uniform, polished boots. Her stomach dropped. Emily, she called softly, take your sisters to the back garden, practice your letters there. Her eldest daughter looked up from where she'd been mending a tear in Lily's dress. Is something wrong, Mama? Nothing at all, just some business to attend to. Emily's eyes narrowed slightly at 14. She was too perceptive for easy lies, but she gathered Clara and Lily without further question. Sarah opened the front door to find Captain Mitchell, sitting astride a bay mare, his uniform immaculate. Despite the early hour, he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, with calculating blue eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of her appearance. Mrs. Matthews, he said, touching his hat brim in a gesture that managed to be both polite and condescending. I trust I'm not disturbing your morning. Not at all, Captain. Though I confess I'm surprised by the visit. Is there news from town? Mitchell dismounted with practiced ease. May I come in? There are some matters I'd like to discuss. Sarah's mind raced. Refusing would seem suspicious, but allowing him inside meant risking discovery if Joshua made any sound. Of course. Though I warn you, the house is simple. We don't receive many visitors of your standing. I'm sure it's perfectly adequate. Mitchell replied, already moving toward the door. Inside, Sarah gestured toward the small sitting area near the fireplace, positioning herself so she could keep one ear tuned toward the back of the house. May I offer you coffee? It's not the finest quality, but thank you. No. Mitchell settled into William's old chair as if he owned it, his gaze sweeping the modest room. I'll be direct, Mrs. Matthews. There have been reports of unusual activity in this area. Strangers seen in the forest, supplies going missing from the general store. Sarah's throat tightened. I haven't seen any strangers, Captain. As for supplies, well, she gestured around the sparse room. As you can see, we have little enough for ourselves, of course. But you spend considerable time in the forest, don't you? Gathering wood, hunting for game. A widow must provide for her children however she can. Mitchell leaned forward, his eyes sharp. Indeed. And in your wanderings, you haven't encountered anyone who shouldn't be there. Indians, perhaps, scouting for raiding parties. The question hung in the air. Like smoke, Sarah forced herself to meet his gaze steadily. Indians, Captain, in these parts? Surely you're mistaken? I'm rarely mistaken about such things. Mrs. Matthews, his smile was cold. But perhaps you're right. Perhaps it's nothing more than gossip and shadows. He stood, and Sarah felt a moment. of relief until his gaze fixed on something behind her. Following his eyes, she saw muddy footprints leading from the kitchen toward the back of the house. Large footprints, definitely not made by her or her daughters. Mitchell's expression sharpened like a blade. "Those are interesting tracks, Mrs. Matthews." "Very interesting indeed." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed Mitchell's gaze to the telltale footprints. "Think," she commanded herself. "Think like William would have. Calm, practical, reasonable." "Oh, those," she said with what she hoped sounded like mild embarrassment. "I'm afraid that's my doing, Captain, or rather, my neighbors." Mitchell's eyebrows rose. "Your neighbors?" "Thomas Brennan from the next farm over. His wife took ill 3 nights ago, terrible fever, and he came seeking help. I gave him what herbs I could spare." Sarah gestured toward the muddy tracks with forced casualness. Poor man was beside himself with worry. "Hardly noticed he was tracking mud through my kitchen." It was a plausible lie. The Brennan farm was real, though nearly 5 miles away, and Thomas was known to be devoted to his wife. More importantly, it would take Mitchell considerable time to ride there and verify the story. Time Joshua might need to recover or escape. Mitchell studied the footprints more closely, his expression unreadable. These seemed quite large. "Mr. Brennan must be a man of considerable stature." "Oh yes," Sarah nodded, warming to her deception. "Nearly as tall as my late husband, and William was well over 6 feet." "I see." Mitchell straightened, but his eyes remained suspicious. "And this illness, when exactly did it begin?" Before Sarah could answer, the sound of children's laughter drifted in from the back garden. Mitchell's attention shifted toward the noise, and Sarah saw her opportunity. "Captain," she said, moving toward the door in what she hoped appeared to be a natural gesture of hospitality, rather than an attempt to guide him away from the house. "I don't mean to be presumptuous, but perhaps you'd like to meet my daughters. They see so few visitors, and Emily especially would be fascinated to hear about your military service." Mitchell paused, clearly torn between his suspicions and the social expectation of polite interest. "Your daughters?" "Yes, 3 of them. Emily's 14, quite bright for her age. She's been teaching herself to read from William's old books." Sarah opened the front door, praying Mitchell would follow. "They're just in the garden, practicing their letters." To her relief, Mitchell moved toward the door, though his gaze lingered on the interior of the house. "I confess, I'm curious to meet them. It's rare to find educated children in these remote areas." As they stepped outside, Sarah caught sight of Emily organizing her sisters beneath the apple tree. Her eldest daughter had arranged slates and chalk in a neat semicircle, creating an impromptu outdoor classroom. Clara was helping Lily form letters, while Emily supervised with the patient authority of a natural teacher. "Girls," Sarah called, "we have a visitor, Captain Mitchell from the military garrison." Emily looked up, her expression brightening with genuine curiosity. At 14, she had little contact with the outside world beyond occasional trips to town, and the appearance of a uniformed officer was undoubtedly exciting. "Good morning, Captain," Emily said, rising and smoothing her simple dress with unconscious dignity. "Are you here on official business?" Mitchell's stern expression softened slightly. "Just routine inquiries, miss. Your mother tells me you're quite the scholar." "I try to be, sir. Knowledge seems more valuable than gold when you live as we do." Wise words. Mitchell glanced around the modest property, the small vegetable garden, the chicken coop, the neat, but obviously poor surroundings. "Your mother has done well raising you alone." "She's the strongest person I know," Emily replied with fierce loyalty. As Mitchell engaged her daughters in conversation, Sarah felt a mixture of pride and terror. Emily's poise and intelligence were creating exactly the impression Sarah hoped for: a normal family, struggling but respectable, with nothing to hide. But even as the captain smiled at Lily's shy attempts to recite her alphabet, Sarah could see his calculating mind working. He was filing away every detail, every inconsistency, building a case from shadows and suppositions. When he finally took his leave, promising to check on the Brennan family's welfare, Sarah knew this was not the end of his interest, it was only the beginning. "Mama," Emily said as they watched Mitchell ride away, "was that man really here about missing supplies?" Sarah looked at her perceptive daughter and realized that keeping secrets from her family might prove just as dangerous as keeping them from Captain Mitchell. That evening, after her daughters had gone to bed, Sarah slipped quietly to the storage room with a bowl of stew and fresh bandages. She found Joshua sitting upright, his back against the wall, staring out the small window at the star-filled sky. His healing was remarkable. The angry redness around his wounds had faded, and he could move his shoulder with only slight wincing. "You had a visitor today," he said without turning from the window. Sarah's breath caught. "You heard, someday." Military man asking questions. Joshua finally looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "You lied for me." "Why?" Sarah set down the bowl and began checking his bandages, using the familiar task to steady her nerves. "I told you I couldn't let you die. But now you risk more than your own life. Your daughters are my responsibility to protect." Her hands worked efficiently, unwrapping the old cloth and examining his shoulder. The wound was closing cleanly. "Just as you were someone's responsibility once." Joshua was quiet for a long moment. Morningstar used to say that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to do what's right. Despite the fear, she sounds wise. She was. His voice carried the weight of loss. "She would have liked you, I think." Sarah paused in her work, touched by the unexpected compliment. "Tell me about her." As she rewrapped his shoulder, Joshua spoke of Morningstar, her laugh like water over stones, her skill with medicinal herbs, her dream of traveling beyond the boundaries of tribal territory to see the great waters in the east. His voice grew soft with memory, and Sarah found herself envying the depth of love he described. "William and I were married young," she found herself saying. "Barely knew each other, really. Our parents arranged a good farmland, suitable families. But we grew to love each other over the years. That's not uncommon among my people either." Joshua said, "But what Morningstar and I had, it was like lightning, sudden, brilliant, dangerous, and it burned everything it touched." Yes, they sat in comfortable silence. To people who understood the weight of loss, Sarah finished tending his wounds and was preparing to leave, when Joshua spoke again. "The soldier Captain Mitchell, he suspects something." Sarah nodded grimly. "He's not easily fooled. I bought us time with the story about the Brennan family. But when he discovers they're well, he'll be back." Yes, Sarah gathered the soiled bandages. "Your leg, how much longer before you can travel?" Joshua tested his weight carefully. Pushing himself to stand, he managed it, though she could see the effort it cost him. "A few more days, perhaps. But Sarah," he paused, meeting her eyes, "where would I go? My own people cast me out. Your people see me as an enemy. There's nowhere left for someone like me." The despair in his voice struck her deeply. She thought of her own moments of hopelessness after William's death, when the world seemed to offer no place for a woman alone, with 3 children to feed. "There has to be somewhere," she said quietly. "There has to be." Before Joshua could respond, the sound of creaking floorboards came from the main house. Sarah froze, listening intently. Footsteps light, but deliberate, moving toward the back door. "Someone's awake," she whispered, quickly blowing out the candle that had provided their light. In the sudden darkness, she heard Joshua shift carefully into a position where he could remain hidden if someone entered. Sarah crept toward the window and peered toward the house. A slender figure in a white nightgown was moving across the backyard, heading directly toward the storage room. Emily. Sarah's single quotes as heart sank. Her eldest daughter's curiosity and intelligence traits she normally celebrated were about to unravel. Everything she'd worked so hard to protect. There was no time to warn Joshua. No way to intercept Emily without creating more noise and suspicion. The door handle turned slowly, and Emily's pale face appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "Mama," she whispered into the darkness, "I know someone's in here." The silence stretched like a taut rope ready to snap in the darkness of the storage room. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Emily stood silhouetted in the doorway, her young face pale but resolute in the moonlight. "Emily," Sarah began, her voice barely above a whisper, "you should be in bed." "So should you, Mama." Emily stepped fully into the room, closing the door behind her with surprising composure. "But you've been coming here every night for almost a week." "I've been watching." Sarah's throat constricted. At 14, Emily had already shouldered more responsibility than most children twice her age. She deserved honesty, but the truth could destroy everything: their safety, their family, their future. "There are things you don't understand, then. Help me understand." Emily's voice carried a quiet authority that reminded Sarah painfully of William. "Is someone hurt? Are we hiding someone?" From the shadows behind Sarah came a soft movement. Joshua was shifting position, probably trying to remain concealed. But Emily's sharp ears caught the sound immediately. "Who's there?" Emily demanded, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. But as she looked at her daughter's determined face, she realized Emily was no longer the child she'd been trying to protect. The hardships of their life had forged her into someone capable of bearing difficult truths. "Emily," Sarah said carefully, "what I'm about to show you, it will change everything. Once you know, you'll be part of something dangerous. There will be no going back." Emily straightened her shoulders. "I'm not a little girl anymore, Mama. Clara and Lily depend on me too. If there's danger to our family, I need to know." Sarah struck a match and relit the candle with trembling hands. The flame cast dancing shadows on the walls as Emily's gaze followed the light to where Joshua sat propped against the far wall. Emily's intake of breath was sharp but controlled. Her eyes took in Joshua's native features, the bandages on his shoulder, the careful way he held himself to avoid aggravating his injuries. To her credit, she didn't scream or run. "He's hurt," she said simply. "Yes, you've been caring for him." "Yes." Emily was quiet for a long moment, studying Joshua's face. "Are you the reason Captain Mitchell came asking questions?" Joshua answered before Sarah could. "Yes. I'm sorry your family has been put at risk because of me." The sound of his voice seemed to solidify Emily's understanding of the situation. This wasn't some wild animal Sarah had been feeding or stolen goods she'd been hiding. This was a man injured, vulnerable, and completely dependent on their protection. "What happened to you?" Emily asked with the direct curiosity of youth. Joshua glanced at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. "I was cast out by my own people. They left me to die in the forest. Your mother found me." "Why were you cast out, Emily?" Sarah warned, but Joshua held up a gentle hand. "It's all right. I fell in love with someone I shouldn't have. When it was discovered, I was beaten and exiled." Emily absorbed this information with surprising maturity. "Like Romeo and Juliet," she said finally. Sarah blinked in surprise. "You've read Shakespeare, Papa's books," Emily explained. "I've read everything in his trunk twice over." She turned back to Joshua. "So you're not dangerous. You're not here to hurt us." "I would die before I let harm come to your family," Joshua said with quiet intensity. "Your mother saved my life. I owe her everything." Emily nodded slowly, as if his words confirmed something she'd already sensed. "Captain Mitchell suspects, doesn't he? That's why Mama looks so frightened today." "We think so," Sarah admitted. "Then we need a better plan than hiding you in the storage room." Emily's voice carried a practical determination that both impressed and terrified Sarah. "If he comes back with soldiers to search the house." "Emily, no." Sarah grasped her daughter's hands. "I won't have you involved in this. It's too dangerous." "I'm already involved, Mama." Emily's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "From the moment you decided to save him, We all became involved, Clara and Lily too, whether they know it or not. Sarah looked between her daughter and Joshua, seeing the truth in Emily's words. There was no protecting her children from this choice, only including them and finding a solution. "What do you suggest?" she asked quietly. Emily's answer surprised them both. "We need to make him disappear completely. And I think I know." Emily's eyes gleamed with the kind of determined intelligence that had always reminded Sarah of William. At his most resourceful, the 14-year-old paced the small confines of the storage room, her mind clearly racing through possibilities. "The old mine shaft," she said finally, turning to face her mother and Joshua. "Up on Copper Hill. About 2 miles north. Papa showed it to me years ago when we were looking for wild berries." Sarah frowned. "Emily, that mine has been abandoned for decades. It's probably not even safe. That's exactly why it's perfect." Emily's voice carried a conviction that belied her age. "No one goes there anymore. The entrance is hidden by overgrown brambles, and there's a small chamber just inside that stays dry year-round. Papa said miners used to shelter there during storms." Joshua shifted carefully, wincing as the movement pulled at his healing shoulder. "You want me to hide in a cave?" "Not hide," Emily corrected. "Live. Temporarily. Mama could bring you supplies without anyone seeing. Captain Mitchell could search our property a dozen times and never think to look there." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and terror at her daughter's quick thinking. "It's too dangerous." "Emily, what if the mine collapses? What if Captain Mitchell returns with soldiers tomorrow?" Emily interrupted gently. "What if they search the house and find Joshua here? What happens to him then? What happens to us?" The questions hung in the air like smoke. Sarah knew the answers all too well. Joshua would likely be killed outright or imprisoned under conditions that amounted to the same thing. She and the girls would be branded as traitors, driven from their home, possibly worse. "The mine shaft makes sense," Joshua said quietly. "I could survive there until I'm strong enough to travel farther." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I won't have you living in a cave like some wild animal. There has to be another way." Emily knelt beside her mother, taking her hands with surprising gentleness. "Mama, I know it's not ideal, but it's temporary, and it's safer than here. Anyway, what about supplies? Food, clean water?" "There's a stream that runs near the mine entrance," Emily explained, "and I can help you carry supplies up there. Tell Clara and Lily we're gathering medicinal plants, they'll never question it." Sarah looked at Joshua, seeing the hope and resignation warring in his dark eyes. "What do you think?" "I think your daughter is very wise," he said softly, "and I think she's right. Every day I stay here puts all of you in greater danger, but your injuries are healing well, thanks to your care." Joshua attempted to stand, managing it with only slight difficulty. "I can make the journey to the mine, especially with help." Emily nodded eagerly. "We could go tomorrow night. The moon will be nearly full enough light to see by, but late enough that no one will be about." Sarah felt the decision crystallizing despite her fears. The plan was dangerous, but everything they'd done since finding Joshua had been dangerous. At least this way, they'd be taking control of the risk instead of simply hoping it would go away. "All right," she said finally, "but we do this carefully. No unnecessary chances, of course." Emily agreed, but Sarah could see the excitement building in her daughter's eyes. For a girl who'd spent most of her life confined to their small farm, this was the closest thing to adventure she'd ever experienced. "There's something else," Joshua said, his voice thoughtful. "If I'm going to be staying in these mountains for any length of time, I should contribute something beyond just hiding." "What do you mean?" Joshua's hands moved to his shirt, where Sarah noticed for the first time a small leather pouch tied around his neck. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my skills among my people. I was known for more than just romantic troubles." He opened the pouch, revealing several small carved objects, animals, geometric patterns, symbols Sarah didn't recognize but found strangely beautiful. I'm a craftsman, Joshua explained. These pieces, they're just what I carry for protection and memory. But given time and proper materials, I could make things. Beautiful things. Things that might be valuable to the right people. Emily's eyes widened as she examined the intricate carvings. You made these? Yes. Sarah took one of the pieces, a small bird with outstretched wings, and marveled at the delicate detail work. They're extraordinary. In the mind, with time to heal and work, I could create a collection. Your town surely has merchants who would value such craftsmanship. Emily looked up at her mother with bright eyes. We could sell them, help support the family. For the first time since this ordeal began, Sarah felt a spark of something beyond mere survival. Hope, perhaps. Or at least the possibility of turning their dangerous secret into something that might improve their lives rather than destroy them. The night air carried the crisp promise of autumn. As Sarah and Emily helped Joshua from the storage room, Clara and Lily slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that their family was about to undertake the most dangerous journey of their lives. Joshua moved with careful determination, his healing body protesting each step, but his spirit resolute. Sarah had packed a canvas bag with medical supplies, blankets, and what food she could spare. Emily carried a smaller satchel containing Joshua's carving tools and the materials they had gathered, pieces of driftwood from the creek, smooth stones, anything that might serve as craft. The path winds up through the oak grove, Emily whispered, pointing toward the dark hillside. It's steep in places, but there are plenty of handholds. Sarah looked at Joshua's pale face in the moonlight. Are you certain you can manage this? I have no choice, he replied simply, and I've traveled farther distances in worse condition. They set out across the meadow behind the house, moving slowly to accommodate Joshua's limitations. The night was alive with the soft sounds of nocturnal creatures, owls calling from distant trees. The rustle of small animals in the underbrush, each sound made Sarah's heart race, wondering if they were being watched or followed. The first part of the journey was relatively easy, crossing familiar ground where Sarah often gathered herbs and mushrooms. But as they began the ascent up Copper Hill, the terrain became more challenging. Joshua's breathing grew labored, and twice they had to stop for him to rest against tree trunks. I'm slowing you down, he said during one such pause, frustration evident in his voice. We have all night, Sarah replied firmly. There's no rush. Emily, who had been scouting ahead, returned with encouraging news. The stream is just around the bend. We're almost there. As they continued climbing, Sarah found herself marveling at her daughter's confidence in the darkness. Emily moved through the forest like someone who had spent years learning its secrets, which Sarah supposed she had, while other girls her age were learning needlework and social graces. Emily had been exploring the wilderness out of necessity and curiosity. The sound of running water reached their ears, and soon they could see the stream Emily had mentioned, a narrow ribbon of silver threading between moss-covered rocks. The mine entrance was exactly as she described, nearly invisible behind a curtain of overgrown brambles and wild grapevines. I'll clear the entrance, Emily said, producing a small knife from her apron. Carefully, Sarah warned. We don't want to disturb too much vegetation. It needs to look natural when we leave. Working together, they created an opening just wide enough for Joshua to pass through. The mine shaft beyond was dark and musty, but Emily had brought along the small lantern, and by its light they could see the chamber. She described a natural widening in the tunnel, with a relatively flat floor and walls that seemed structurally sound. It's perfect, Joshua said, his voice echoing slightly in the enclosed space. Dry, hidden, defensible. Sarah spread the blankets on the ground while Emily arranged the food supplies in a natural alcove. The space wasn't large, but it felt secure in a way the storage room never had. The stream provides fresh water, Emily pointed out, and there are wild berries and edible plants all around this area. You won't starve. Joshua tested his makeshift bed, then looked up at them with an expression of profound gratitude. I don't know how to thank you both. What you've done, what you're risking. You don't need to thank us, Sarah said softly. Just survive. Get strong. Create beautiful things. As they prepared to leave, Emily pulled several carved objects from Joshua's pouch. Show me how to tell people about these. What makes them special? Joshua selected one piece, a small wolf with intricate patterns carved into its fur. This represents strength in the face of adversity. Among my people, the wolf who survives alone is the wolf who learns to be both fierce and wise. Emily nodded thoughtfully, and people in town would want something like this if they understood its meaning. Yes. But Sarah, Joshua caught her arm gently as she turned to go. Be careful who you approach. Some will see only the work of savage hands and reject it regardless of its beauty. Sarah squeezed his hand. We'll be careful, and we'll be back tomorrow night with more supplies. As they made their way back down the hillside, Sarah felt a complex mixture of relief and worry. They'd accomplished their goal. Joshua was safely hidden in a place Mitchell would never think to search, but they'd also committed themselves to a deception that could last weeks or months. Looking at Emily, walking confidently beside her, Sarah realized her daughter had crossed some invisible threshold tonight. The girl who had helped plan and execute Joshua's escape was no longer a child, but a young woman capable of making life-altering decisions. The question now was whether those decisions would save them all or destroy everything they'd worked to protect. 2 weeks had passed since Joshua's move to the mine, and Sarah was amazed by the transformation she witnessed each time she visited him. The wounded, desperate man she'd found in the forest had evolved into someone focused and purposeful. His makeshift workshop occupied one corner of the cave, where carefully arranged pieces of wood, stone, and bone waited to be transformed by his skilled hands. Look at this, Emily whispered in wonder, holding up Joshua's latest creation. It was a small deer, carved from a piece of birch wood, so delicately detailed that it seemed ready to leap from her palm. The animal's eyes held an almost human intelligence, and its antlers were carved with intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story. Joshua sat, cross-legged on his blanket, working by the light of a small oil lamp Sarah had brought. His movements were precise and meditative, each cut of his knife deliberate and meaningful. The rhythmic scraping of blade against wood had become the soundtrack to their visits. How do you know what to carve? Sarah asked, settling beside him. With the evening supplies, fresh bread, dried meat, and clean bandages, though he needed them less each day. The wood tells me, Joshua replied, not looking up from his work. Each piece has a spirit inside, waiting to be released. I just remove what doesn't belong. Emily examined several finished pieces arranged on a flat stone that served as Joshua's display area. There was a bear rising on its hind legs, a soaring eagle with outstretched wings, and a collection of smaller animals that seemed to interact with each other, a rabbit watching a fox, a turtle beside a flowing stream carved so realistically that Emily expected to see water moving. These are extraordinary, Sarah said, picking up a carving of a mother wolf with 2 cubs. The piece radiated protectiveness and fierce love. Mrs. Henderson at the general store has customers from as far as Richmond. Travelers, merchants, people with money to spend on beautiful things. Do you think it's safe? Emily asked, showing them in town. Sarah had been wrestling with the same question. Joshua's artistic style was distinctly Native American. The patterns, the spiritual quality of the animals, the way each piece seemed to capture some essential truth about its subject. Anyone familiar with indigenous art would recognize its origins immediately. We'll have to be careful about how we present them, she said finally. Perhaps say they're the work of a traveling artist who asked us to sell them on commission. Joshua's knife paused mid-cut. You would lie about their origin? To protect you. Yes, Sarah met his gaze steadily. These pieces are beautiful enough to stand on their own merit. Their creator's identity shouldn't matter to anyone who truly appreciates art. But it will matter, Joshua said quietly. The moment someone suspects they're made by native hands, the value will change. Some will see them as curiosities or trophies. Others will refuse them entirely. Emily frowned. That's not fair. Fairness is a luxury we can't afford right now, Sarah replied, though the truth of it pained her. What matters is keeping you safe and finding a way to support our family. Joshua resumed his carving, but Sarah could see the conflict in his expression. She understood his pride. These pieces were expressions of his culture, his training, his very soul. Asking him to hide that identity felt like another kind of betrayal. There might be another way, Emily said suddenly. What if we don't sell them in town at all? Both adults looked at her with curiosity. The railroad brings travelers through Millbrook twice a week, Emily continued, her voice growing excited with possibility. People from cities back east, heading west to the territories. They might appreciate the exotic nature of the work. See it as authentic American craftsmanship rather than something threatening. Sarah considered this. Millbrook was a daze. Right away, far enough from Captain Mitchell's usual patrol routes that the risk of discovery was smaller. And Emily was right. Wealthy travelers might view Joshua's work as sophisticated folk art rather than the product of a savage culture. It would mean longer trips, Sarah mused, more time away from Clara and Lily. I could watch them, Emily offered quickly. I've been doing it anyway while you visit Joshua. Joshua looked up from his carving, hope flickering in his dark eyes. You would do this? Travel so far to sell the work of someone you barely know? I know enough, Sarah said firmly. I know you're a good man who's suffered injustice. I know your art brings beauty into a world that often lacks it. And I know that helping you feels like the right thing to do. As if summoned by her words. The sound of horses reached their ears, distant but approaching. All three froze, listening intently as the hoofbeats grew closer. It's probably nothing, Emily whispered. But her face had gone pale. Joshua was already moving, swiftly gathering his tools and finished pieces. Blow out the lamp, he instructed quietly. Get back from the entrance. In the sudden darkness, they heard the horses pass by on the road below, to riders, maybe three, traveling at a steady pace. The sound faded without stopping, but the incident reminded them all how precarious their situation remained. When the forest was quiet again, Joshua relit the lamp with steady hands. Tomorrow, he said to Sarah, we try Millbrook. The morning air was crisp as Sarah and Emily set out for Millbrook. A canvas bag carefully packed with Joshua's finest pieces. Nestled between layers of soft cloth, Clara had accepted their explanation about gathering rare herbs for the coming winter, while little Lily was simply excited to have the house to herself. For grown-up games with her sisters, the railroad station in Millbrook bustled with activity. Steam hissed from the great locomotive as passengers disembarked, well-dressed men in fine coats, women with elaborate hats, children in clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's family spent on food in a month. These were people from a different world, one where beauty was valued and money was plentiful. Remember, Sarah whispered to Emily as they approached the platform, we're representing a traveling craftsman who specializes in American frontier art. Emily nodded, but Sarah could see her daughter's nervousness. At 14, Emily had rarely interacted with strangers, much less wealthy ones from distant cities. Their first attempts were discouraging. Several passengers glanced dismissively at their simple clothes and walked away before Sarah could even open the bag. Others listened politely but showed no real interest in purchasing anything. Then a distinguished gentleman with silver hair and an expensive walking stick paused to examine what they offered. Frontier craftsmanship, you say? His accent carried the refined tones of Boston or Newark. May I see? Sarah carefully unwrapped the mother wolf with cubs, the piece that had so impressed her the night before. The gentleman's eyebrows rose as he took it in his hands, turning it to catch the morning light. Extraordinary detail work, he murmured. The artist has remarkable skill. This captures something essential about the subject. He has a gift for seeing the spirit in his materials, Emily said, her nervousness giving way to genuine enthusiasm for Joshua's work indeed. The gentleman examined the piece more closely. The style is unique. Almost reminds me of some indigenous work I've seen, but more sophisticated somehow. Sarah's heart skipped, but the man's tone was appreciative rather than suspicious. How much? He asked. Sarah had spent sleepless nights trying to determine fair prices. Too high and they'd scare away customers. Too low and they'd undervalue Joshua's extraordinary talent. $15, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The man didn't hesitate. Done. He reached into his coat and produced a leather wallet thick with bills. Do you have others of similar quality? By the time the eastbound train departed 2 hours later, Sarah and Emily had sold for pieces for a total of $58, more money than their family usually saw in 3 months. The buyers were enthusiastic, with several asking if they could arrange for future purchases. We did it, Emily breathed as they watched the train disappear around a bend. We actually did it. Sarah stared at the money in her hands, hardly believing their success. But even as joy flooded through her, a familiar worry crept in. What now? Emily asked. Do we go home and tell Joshua? Before Sarah could answer, a voice behind them made both women freeze. Well, Mrs. Matthews, what brings you so far from home? Captain Mitchell emerged from behind a freight wagon, his uniform immaculate despite the dusty station, his pale eyes fixed on the canvas bag in Emily's hands with unmistakable interest. Captain Mitchell. Sarah managed, her mouth suddenly dry. I didn't expect to see you in Millbrook. Official business, he replied smoothly, following reports of suspicious activity, stolen goods being sold by unknown parties. His gaze sharpened. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? Emily stepped protectively closer to her mother, the bag of remaining carvings clutched against her chest. Of course not, Sarah said, fighting to keep her voice level. We're simply running errands, family business. I see. Mitchell's smile was cold as winter. And what sort of family business requires traveling 20 miles from home with such interesting cargo? He gestured toward Emily's bag, and Sarah realized with growing horror that he'd been watching them, had seen them selling. Joshua's work, had probably heard every word of their conversations with customers. Perhaps, Mitchell continued, his voice deadly quiet. You care to show me what you've been so eager to sell to unsuspecting travelers? Sarah looked at Emily, seeing her own fear reflected in her daughter's eyes. They'd been so focused on the success of their sales that they'd failed to notice. They were being observed, now, with Joshua's remaining artwork in their possession, and $58 that they couldn't adequately explain. They were trapped. Mitchell stepped closer, his hand resting casually on the pistol at his belt. I'm waiting, Mrs. Matthews, and I'm not known for my patience. Sarah's mind raced as Mitchell's expectant stare bore into her. The weight of the money in her pocket felt like evidence of guilt, and Emily's trembling beside her made the situation even more precarious. But as she looked at the captain's smug expression, something inside her shifted from fear to defiance. These aren't stolen goods, Captain, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. They're the work of a talented craftsman. I see. And where exactly is this mysterious craftsman? Mitchell's eyes glittered with triumph. Because I've made inquiries throughout the county, Mrs. Matthews. No one knows of any traveling artist matching your description. Emily clutched the bag tighter, but Sarah gently touched her daughter's arm, a silent signal to trust her. You're right, Sarah said, surprising both Emily and Mitchell. There is no traveling craftsman. Mitchell's eyebrows rose. So you admit to fraud? I admit to trying to protect someone whose only crime was being born with the wrong skin color. The captain's expression sharpened. Explain. Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she said next would determine not just her fate, but Joshua's, and her daughter's as well. The man who created these pieces is someone I found dying in the forest. Someone who had been beaten and left for dead by his own people for the crime of falling in love. A native, Mitchell said, his voice flat. A man, Sarah corrected firmly. A human being with extraordinary talent and a gentle heart, Mitchell laughed. But there was no humor in it. Mrs. Matthews, you're confessing to harboring a dangerous fugitive. Do you realize the severity of dangerous? Emily spoke up suddenly, her young voice cutting through the captain's words. You want to know what's dangerous? Captain Mitchell? Emily. No. Sarah warned, but her daughter stepped forward with surprising courage. What's dangerous is judging someone by their race instead of their character. What's dangerous is letting prejudice blind you to beauty and goodness. Emily opened the canvas bag and pulled out one of Joshua's carvings, a small bird with wings, spread in flight. This was carved by hands you would call savage. Tell me, Captain, what's savage about this? Mitchell examined the piece despite himself, and Sarah saw something flicker across his features in willing admiration, perhaps, or simple human appreciation for beauty. Skill doesn't excuse the danger he represents, Mitchell said finally, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. What danger? Sarah pressed. He's injured, alone, cut off from his people. He poses no threat to anyone. You don't understand the larger picture. Then explain it to me, Sarah interrupted. Tell me exactly what threat one heartbroken craftsman poses to the great United States Army. Mitchell's jaw tightened. There have been reports of missing supplies, strange tracks, evidence of native presence in these mountains. My superiors believe there's a scouting party preparing for raids. And you think Joshua is part of this imaginary threat? I think, Mitchell said slowly, that you've been deceived. These people are masters of manipulation. He stopped mid-sentence as Emily pulled out another carving, the mother wolf with cubs, that had sold so well earlier in the afternoon. Light, the piece seemed to glow with inner warmth, the mother's protective stance radiating love and fierce devotion. Look at this, Emily said quietly. Really look at it. Does this come from the hands of someone who thinks about violence and raids, or from someone who understands love and protection and family? Mitchell stared at the carving for a long moment, something working behind his eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, less certain, more human. Where is he? Sarah's heart hammered. Why? Because, Mitchell said, surprising them both, I need to see for myself. I need to understand who we're really dealing with here. Emily looked at her mother with wide eyes. Sarah felt as though she stood at the edge of a cliff, with only faith to guide her next step. He's not a threat, Captain, she said quietly. He's just a man trying to survive in a world that sees him as an enemy. Mitchell holstered his weapon, a gesture Sarah hadn't even realized she'd been waiting for. Show me, he said. The climb to the mine shaft felt different this time. Captain Mitchell rode silently behind Sarah and Emily, his earlier hostility replaced by something harder to define, curiosity, perhaps, or the careful attention of a man reconsidering everything he thought he knew. As they approached the hidden entrance, Sarah called out softly, Joshua, it's Sarah. I have Emily with me, and a friend. The brambles rustled, and Joshua emerged into the afternoon sunlight. Despite weeks of living in the cave, he carried himself with quiet dignity. His injuries had healed well, and his time crafting had given him a sense of purpose that showed in his bearing. Mitchell dismounted slowly, his hand nowhere near his weapon. For a long moment, the two men simply studied each other, the uniformed representative of expanding American authority, and the displaced native craftsman who had found sanctuary in these mountains. Captain Mitchell, Joshua said with formal courtesy, inclining his head slightly. You're not what I expected, Mitchell admitted. What did you expect? Someone fiercer, more warlike. Mitchell gestured toward the mine entrance. Someone who wouldn't choose to live in hiding rather than fight. Joshua's smile held no bitterness. Fighting cost me everything I loved once. I have no desire to repeat the mistake, Sarah watched the exchange with held breath. Everything depended on these next few moments: Joshua's freedom, her family's safety, the future they might build together. "Mrs. Matthews tells me you're a craftsman," Mitchell continued that in response. Joshua disappeared into the cave and returned with several pieces of his latest work. Created during the long days of healing and solitude, he laid them on a flat stone, where the light could catch their details: a family of deer grazing peacefully, an eagle soaring above mountain peaks, a series of small figures that seemed to dance with joy. Mitchell picked up each piece, examining them with growing amazement. "These are extraordinary. They come from understanding," Joshua said simply. "When you live close to nature, you learn to see the spirit in all living things. And this is what you want to do. Make these beautiful things. It's what I was meant to do. Among my people, I was trained as both warrior and artist, but my heart always belonged to creation rather than destruction." Mitchell was quiet for a long time, turning one of the carved eagles in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I've been a soldier for 15 years. I've seen what happens when different peoples meet with weapons drawn. Nothing good ever comes of it. Then why pursue someone who poses no threat?" Emily asked boldly. Mitchell looked at the young woman with something approaching respect. "Because I was told he was a threat. Because I believed what I was told without questioning it." He paused. "Because it's easier to see enemies than it is to see individuals." Sarah stepped forward. "What happens now, Captain?" Mitchell set down the eagle carving and straightened to his full height. Now I report that my investigation found no evidence of hostile native activity in this region. The tracks and missing supplies were likely the work of ordinary drifters or bandits." Hope bloomed in Sarah's chest. "And Joshua is a talented craftsman, whom I have the pleasure of recommending to the merchants in Millbrook and beyond." Mitchell's smile transformed his entire face. "I believe there's a significant market for authentic American frontier art." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the garden behind their house, watching Joshua teach Clara and Lily how to identify different types of wood by their grain and texture. His workshop had expanded beyond the mine to include a proper studio in the barn, where he created pieces that were now sought after by collectors from Boston to Charleston. Emily, now 15 and more confident than ever, managed the business side of their enterprise with impressive skill. The money from Joshua's art had allowed them to expand the farm, purchase better tools, and even hire help during harvest season. But more important than the financial improvement was the change in their family itself. Joshua had become more than Sarah's husband in a quiet ceremony that blended traditions from both their cultures. He had become a father to her daughters, teaching them not just about craftsmanship, but about seeing beauty in the world around them. Captain Mitchell visited occasionally, sometimes bringing potential customers, sometimes simply enjoying the peaceful atmosphere of their home. He had become an unexpected ally, using his position to protect other displaced natives who sought refuge in the surrounding mountains. As evening settled over their land, Sarah watched her family gather for dinner, daughters chattering excitedly about their day's discoveries, Joshua quietly adding to their stories with his own observations about the forest they all called home. The woman who had once felt abandoned by the world now understood that family could be created as well as inherited, that love could grow from the most unlikely soil, and that sometimes the greatest courage lay not in fighting against the current of change, but in learning to navigate it with grace and hope. The stars emerged one by one above their small farmhouse, witnessing a life rebuilt from loss into something richer and more beautiful than anything Sarah had dared to imagine. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. See you in the next story.